Today on Mysterious Morsels, we're talking about the top 10 suspense movies of all time. So I just love suspense movies. I love psychological thrillers. I talked about horror movies not too long ago, and I just thought, suspense, different than horror. I didn't even get talking about sci-fi yet, but it just happens to be, 'tis the season for spooky things, and I thought, suspenseful, let's talk about that. So a long time ago, there was a movie called Color of Night. Bruce Willis was in it, and Ruben Blades was in it, and I just love it. It's kind of a whodunit. A lot of people, a lot of famous people in it, and it was definitely a psychological. Scott Bakula's in it. There's a lot of psychological opinions to it because it was two psychologists, and they were friends forever. One's on the East Coast, one's on the West Coast. Unfortunately, one of the patients passes away, and Bruce Willis has that happen to him, and he can no longer see the color red. And he travels to just get time off and go see his other psychologist buddy on the West Coast, who's done far better for himself, written a book, and is much more successful, and has tons more money and tons more clients and tons more patients, and that's Scott Bakula. And as they get chatting about different things, they have a murder, and they're trying to figure out who done it, and it's one of the patients in group therapy. But you really think like several times there's like a false who done it, or you think you know who it is or whatnot. So it was a pretty cool movie, and probably a lesser known movie if I had to guess, but definitely worth the watch. I put that at number 10. Number 9, 13 Ghosts. And as much as I want to call this a horror movie, it's probably more on the suspense side due to the Zodiac component of it, and because you're not really waiting for the ghosts, if you will, to kind of handle things in the end, is how I'll put it, so I don't have a spoiler alert. So there was a black Zodiac concocted in the theme of the movie, or in the plot of the movie, and there were a lot of people at work to try and bring these ghosts together to make this black Zodiac a reality. And then there's people on it for good and bad reasons, and of course they all come together, and it's a disaster. And again, pretty star-studded cast. Tony Shalhoub is the main character. He's a teacher, and he lost his wife in a fire, and they have to go through this haunted house of glass that's got containment spells to keep the ghosts in, of these 13 specific ghosts. And in the end, it's just surprising to see, like, one by one as they're revealed, and kind of who saves the day. So pretty neat. I would normally put that under a horror genre because of the ghosts, but honestly, it's pretty neat, and it could go under the suspenseful category. And you know what? This is my list, so I don't apologize for it. Okay, moving on. Number 8, Final Destination. Huge franchise to Final Destination, but the original, the OG, if you will, I don't believe they remade it at all. They just kept going with it. But the original Final Destination, I thought, was brilliantly done. Unfortunately, the sequel, the second one, was kind of terrible. A totally different spin. But after that, they picked up and went a really interesting direction. So worth the watch. But the first one was very cool. And, it's basically cheating death. And you're constantly wondering who's going to get it next, if you will. And I love this for personal reasons. Being a teacher that teaches language, I think it's hilarious because the initial premise is a bunch of kids going to France on a French trip, and they get together, and then all things go awry on the plane. And when they're on their way over, there's tragedy to be had, and then they have to kind of put the pieces back together. So I love poking fun at the kids that I teach, and tell them you should watch that movie before they go overseas. It's a really bad joke, but the high school kids get a kick out of it. So yeah, probably not the movie you want to watch before boarding a plane, but I'm just saying, very funny. Good jump scares in Final Destination is very cool. 7, my all-time favorite. So Jaws. Dun, 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 dun. Love Jaws. How could 2 notes make you so paranoid? I don't know. Not only am I obsessed with sharks, obviously, but I think Jaws belongs in the number 7 spot because, again, never putting it in a horror genre, but people do. You have this like man versus animal, or man versus nature conflict going on, and there were a lot of problems on set. So Jaws became more suspenseful by accident. Bruce the shark, named after Spielberg's lawyer, never functioned correctly because when they built it and they put it together to test it, it was always done in freshwater tanks. When they got offshore and put the salt water in it, it would goof up and score all the electronics, and the shark rarely worked. So they had a cutout of the left side, the right side, and they had like a dummy shark that would just sort of float. But the actual mechanical shark that was on a gimbal, it didn't do as well as it was supposed to do. And as a result, they had to creatively shoot underwater scenes, and it became more than halfway through the movie before you even see the actual shark. You're teased by a fin or somebody getting sucked underwater, or different things coming at you, but you never actually see the shark. So the suspense works so great in that movie. I don't believe Jaws could ever be remade. And top three, like I said, everything in my life was shaped by Jaws, Star Wars, and The Godfather, because they were the first three movies I watched. So Jaws, props to Jaws. 6, Escape Room, kind of a newer movie, and they have since made a sequel. Both are pretty good. Escape Room was neat because it was not only the how the people were gonna bite it in the end, but also who was going to what. Like, there was a lot of plot unfolded there. So it was not only the method by which they were getting picked off one at a time, but the thematics behind it, and then also just how they were able to do that, within the setting that they were, and then who knew who from behind that you found out later. So pretty neat for being modern day. I liked it a lot. Number 5 is ironically a number 7. So Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman years ago about 7 Deadly Sins, and you could argue it's more of a horror gore, but it's definitely a suspenseful situation because in the end reveal, I mean, once you watch it, it's kind of one of those movies that, unfortunately, it's fantastic, but the rewatchability is sort of on the negative scale. Big shock in the end, and very cool. All the different 7 Deadly Sins are put out throughout the movie and displayed for you, and you're, of course, looking to find out who did what. And it's interesting because, just a sidebar nod, if you've ever seen Usual Suspects, pretty suspenseful as well. Also kind of a whodunit, and again, you've got that Kevin Spacey connection, so honorable mention there. Number 4, Jordan Peele's Get Out. I loved this when I saw it. It's pretty new. I would say that it was, for, again, modern day, I feel like everything's been done, and this was bold and interesting and psychological thriller, 100%, using psychology and hypnosis to really get to people, and that can play with your mind because you're in a vulnerable state. And then just the mind trickery that goes on there. And then in the end, you're like, is this really happening? Very fantastic, cool reveals. Love it. Props to him. 3 would be Shutter Island with Leo DiCaprio. And I believe Mark Ruffalo was in that one as well. Shutter Island was very cool. Very neat in the sense that they are investigating this situation and they go to this remote place. And in doing so, find out that there's more connection to them than they thought. With it, and that's always interesting because then you kind of get sucked into the plot and you start to believe, well, maybe it's not who you thought it was, or maybe there's more to the backstory, or maybe this conspiracy theory is accurate. So always kind of a cool thing. So Shutter Island, really neat. Definitely not what you would suspect or expect. Number 2, props to M. Night Shyamalan. You could really put his whole catalog here, but Sixth Sense takes the cake. Sixth Sense was by far, I think, the best one that he came up with. Totally great plots, always a twist. And he did this all with a PG-13 rating, I might add, which I think is very impressive because, much like Spielberg too, you don't have to push the envelope by way of gore or by way of salacious things. You can always use your mind and creativity and imagination to get to the scary part or to get to the visceral reaction that you want. So Sixth Sense was fantastic. Again, watchability. Now that one is interesting because even though I know what happens in the end, now that I've seen it, I could go back and watch that and look for clues. Very neat. I love his whole catalog. I think some of them are weaker than others, but for the most part, they're very strong. I mean, you could argue that The Village is very good and has a big reveal, and The Visit is very good and has a big reveal, and Devil and Unbreakable, of course, and then they went on to do Split. Really, his whole catalog is celebrated. I think on the weaker side, Lady in the Water is more of a storytelling vehicle, and probably the Happening is sort of like, it's happening. What's happening? I don't know, something with trees, but it's happening. Okay, but they were probably the lesser, I'll say, scary ones. I love, again, more in the sci-fi, but I love Signs. That was very good too. But even though it's not a shock that you see, the alien or whatever, how it all came about was interesting, and how that all unfolded. So there's a lot of like tightly woven loose ends that get put together neatly, and Sixth Sense, I think, is like the whole package there. So don't know too many people that didn't like that or didn't go watch it once or twice. I went back and saw it a few times just to go see what I missed or how I was clueless about that. But that was a big breakthrough. And that's why, as a result, it's at the number 2 spot. Big fan of M. Night Shyamalan. Philly guy, to my knowledge, went to Temple, so very good. Go Owls. Number 1 spot, I'm going to go with Silence of the Lambs. Hello, Clarice. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti. So, Silence of the Lambs, fantastic. First of all, he's a cannibal. Hello. You don't really see that too often. You know, who's eating brains? Obviously, Hannibal Lecter. So, just the Anthony Hopkins of it all is fantastic. But apart from performances and whatnot, the whole Clarice Starling and Jack relationship and how they basically take this fledgling person and have her go after this complete psychopath by way of another psychopath was so cool, and they had so many components to it. It's a simple shoot in most of the movie, and it's a very dark theme, but very cool, very nicely done. Again, all your dots are dotted, all your T's are crossed in the end, but you have to get there, and you think you're in a spot, but then you're not, and you think you're somewhere else and you're not, and you think the case is solved and it's not, and then there's all these backstories to it. And even in the end, as much closure as you have, you still have this like open-endedness. Now, they did go on years later to make Hannibal and Red Dragon and such, and they were all pretty good too. I mean, the sequels, they hold up. But again, the OG, I believe it was 1990 or 91 with Silence of the Lambs. So I think that takes the number 1 spot because that was pretty gut-wrenching and new, I'll say, in a new style of how to present that kind of psychological thriller in a whodunit where, yeah, there's some jump scenes and things that maybe wouldn't make all audiences comfortable, but it wasn't total gore and complete disgusted and perversion or anything like that. It was watchable. And I wouldn't call it a family movie, but you know, if you had teens and whatever, you could certainly watch it like with your fam. So there was definitely some parts in there, maybe not, but you know, it's not horrific. So very cool in that sense. It wasn't just, you know, gore for gore's sake, or they were really playing on the psyche, and that's why I think that these movies are great for suspense and kind of building up to that whodunit or who was the culprit or how did this happen, and very neat. So hopefully you enjoyed them as much as I did. I've just been thinking a lot about that given the season. So if you like this type of content, scare the like button into turning blue and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. Thanks for watching.